Well, welcome back to Face the Nation, page 2. Dee Dee Myers was President Clinton's press secretary. She's now a contributing editor of Vanity Fair. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich is the co-host now of CNN's Crossfire. We want to welcome Wall Street Journal columnist and editorial board member Kimberley Strassel. This is her first Face the Nation. We're glad to have you. And rounding out our foursome, someone who's been here many, many times, the chief correspondent of the Washington Post, Dan Balz. Let me just throw this out there. Does anybody think a deal will be cut in the next 48 hours, or are we headed to default? And Mr. Speaker, why don't you start?
Well, I don't think we're headed to default, but I doubt if a deal will be cut in the next 48 hours. I think that it's much too complicated, and I think that the very fact that you only had Reid and McConnell meet yesterday for the first time in 17 days tells you how big a mess this is and how much the personal hostility is a part of this.
You know, I was very struck this morning. John McCain and Chuck Schumer sitting here across the table. Two people who are very different ideologically, but they're both smart people. They're people of goodwill. And you sit here and wonder, how is it that these two people like this, cannot be the ones to get this thing done? And yet, somehow or another, there seem to be all these pressures, Dee Dee, on the leaders on both sides that is keeping this from happening.
Well, you have all these processes that begin and then they die, and it throws it back to leadership. But it hasn't just been that Reid and McConnell haven't met in the last 17 days. They haven't met since July. And so you have a leadership that's not talking to each other, and then you have members that aren't controlled by the leaders, particularly in the Republican Party in the House. And so now it's back to Reid and McConnell being the last gasp between, you know, a deal and default, and we'll see whether they can get it there. I agree with Speaker Gingrich that at the end of the day, there will be a deal because I think cooler heads will prevail. We cannot allow this to happen. But until then, it's a high wire act.
Kimberly?
But you strip out all the nonsense that's been going on, and in particular the big discussion about defunding the president's health care bill, the back and forth. What you've really come down to, and what we are at, is sort of a repeat of 2011. This has become a fight again over the debt and deficits and spending. And you have a repeat again of Democrats saying we don't want to give a dollar, and Republicans saying you have got to have a plan before we raise the president's spending authority again with the debt limit. Now, when you look at it in that regard, there shouldn't be any reason that you can't come to some sort of solution, but it's all been mired down in all of these extraneous sort of debates about everything, which is getting in the way of getting a final
And it's
answer.
not just Democrats versus Republicans, Senate versus House. It's everybody against everybody, Republicans against Republicans, especially in the House, Dan.
Well, that has been a lot of this, Bob, and as we know, the Tea Party faction in the House drove this battle for a long time, and the question now is the degree to which the Republican leadership can pull back from that and find some kind of agreement with, it'll have to start in the Senate, between McConnell and Harry Reid. Can they then resell that in the House? And I think that that's why, it's, as the Speaker says, this is not going to come quickly. It's going to take a little while for it to happen.
Mr. Speaker, what would you have done if, back in the days when you were Speaker, if a Republican senator had called up some of your folks and said, I know where Gingrich is headed, but here's why you shouldn't follow him? And that's exactly what Ted Cruz did.
Oh, but look, this stuff happens all the time. People forget. The president owns the executive branch. The president appoints the cabinet. The president is surrounded by staff. In the House and Senate, the leaders are actually elected by the people they're leading. So the people who do the elections have enormous authority to run around. I mean, back when Reagan was trying to pass his tax bill, at one point, Packwood, who was the chair of the Finance Committee, was totally off the reservation, doing whatever he wanted to. I mean, the people, we don't do the American people a service when we pretend that the Congress is supposed to be orderly and rational. It is not. It's not the nature of it.
One of the problems from the beginning is it's unclear what this fight is about, right? I mean, it was about defunding Obamacare or at least, you know, delaying the individual mandate or whatever. The ball has kept moving. American people don't know what this fight is about. They're not going to get their way. The Republicans went into a fight they could not win. Everyone around them, except for a handful of people in the middle of it, knew they could not win it. Now, what's it about? Kim, you make the point that we have to focus on. You know, now we're into a debt ceiling fight, and that should be about spending. But this has not been about that at all, and so now the sides are trying to revamp, sort of focus on what this is about, and come back with some reasonable proposals.
But it is now, and I think what's actually interesting, we've been talking a little bit about Republican divisions. I think, and you alluded to this in your earlier interview, there's now become a Democratic division on this. And what you have is, you have a White House who, was talking to the House GOP and did seem to realize there is a benefit for them of sitting down and getting this done. If the president does not get some long-term solution on the debt ceiling, if he does not get this budget question out of the way, he is going to be dealing with it for the next 3 months, 6 months, year, and then you can kiss goodbye to all of his other priorities, immigration reform, a focus on the economy. The problem is you have Senate Democrats like Harry Reid that have been stopping that and stopping that and stopping that. One, because they seem to want to make a political point and crush Republicans, as it were. But two, a lot of them don't want the president to do a deal on entitlements. They like having it as a campaign issue. They like going out and saying Republicans are the people throwing Granny off the cliff. If the president does something longer term on entitlements, it makes it harder for them to do that. And so there's a lot of resistance among the more liberal wing of the Democratic Party to do a deal on that now.
Dan, where does this go now? Put aside all the things that are right, because people on both sides are right on some things and wrong on other sides.
Well, I think there's.
But we're into this process now. It's like World War I. It started going down the tracks, and nobody really wanted it, but nobody knew how to stop it.
The remarkable thing is how long we have spent talking about process, and now you're beginning to see at least some sign of a substantive discussion, but it seems to me that the way out probably is solve the process piece first and then get to the substantive discussion. And I think that's where the negotiations are going to have to be over the next several days. How long do you extend the government spending authority in order to then have the larger discussion that Kim is talking about? But there's also the question about the politics of it. And clearly the Democrats feel they are in a very strong position right now, and by all measures, all the polling we've seen in the last 5 days tells them that. And Republicans are waking up to that as well. And so Republicans have a decision to make about how far they want to press this at a time when their situation is pretty bad.
Yeah, I would just remind everyone, it's 390 days to the next election. At this stage in 1983, both Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were in deep trouble. In 1995-96, people thought we were in deep trouble. We picked up 2 Senate seats and became the first reelected House majority since 1928, while Bill Clinton got reelected president. I'll take that kind of trouble every week. So I think House Republicans are faced with a real challenge, and I may be the only person at this table who believes this. I think the president deliberately wants to strip the House of the ability to negotiate in these kind of environments, because he understands he's got 3 years of dealing with them, because they're going to keep the House. And I think he is really worried that they're going to come back at him every 90 days and get one more bite, and he is prepared to go to the wall. That's why when Boehner walks in and says, I'll give you a clean debt ceiling for 6 weeks, he says no. Now, Reid is actually up the ante and said, I won't even accept it unless you start getting rid of the sequester. So Reid is saying to fiscal conservatives, I want more money in order to let you pass a bill to reopen the government.
But this is why the definition of success is very odd here. How is it a White House victory to push this off for 90 days, or to push this off for 3 months or 6 months, or however long it is? The only way you really make this go away is to do exactly the opposite of what they're doing. It's to sit down and negotiate and come to sort of long-term deal on a budget deal.
But I think that I think the issue for the White House is how do you get some kind of relief from sequester, which is to say, rearrange the way the spending is, and the numbers that they're looking at decline as of January, and so that was one of the problems that they were seeing in what was being talked about over the last couple of days, which is that in January the numbers actually go down and get locked in, and I think they want some flexibility on that to be able to say, is there a way to rearrange the spending even at an agreed upon level that makes these levels less onerous, particularly on defense and some other areas?
Well, I think the president has said as much that he wants to break the fever, right? This isn't a secret. So I think that's part of where the process has to go for now. He is not going to allow He's not going to go along with a process that loads up a debt ceiling bill with a lot of non-extraneous issues as far as he's concerned. And he's sort of stuck between two very unappetizing alternatives, right? On the one hand, a government that's going to lock in dysfunction. On the other hand, a debt ceiling that if you breach it sends the economy into a tailspin. So, I mean, at some point he's going to have to give, but negotiating with a gun to your head every few months, as Kim said, is unsustainable. How do you stop it? You get past the,
right.
you get past it.
Look, I think this is a very audacious, to use one of the president's favorite words, this is a very audacious strategy. He wants to repeal 60 years of tradition, going back to Eisenhower, of putting things in the debt ceiling, and he wants to pretend that the 18th government shutdown since 1976 is somehow radical and different. And if he can pull off this alternative reality, he's then free for 3 years to do virtually whatever he wants to. The House Republicans, on the other hand, want to make sure that the president has to pay a price every time he gets a debt ceiling and every time he gets an appropriations bill. And that's why this is actually a legitimate historic struggle, not just a problem of personality defects.
Do you think that Boehner is going to survive this?
Sure. I think Boehner's probably stronger now than he was 3 months ago inside the conference.
How so?
I think every conservative who had doubts about Boehner has watched Boehner now very resolutely keep moving the system down the road and stand by the values that they told him they cared about. And I think John is probably closer to his conference today than he was 3 months ago.
But he can't move a bill.
But on the other hand, they may be comfortable saying, okay, the president gets to choose. The president of the United States really want to default? The President of the United States really wants to leave the government closed?
There's no bill to move. I mean, look at what Republicans proposed to the
Partly
president.
because no bill can be moved.
Well, yeah, but what the Republicans proposed to the White House was eminently reasonable. It said short-term debt ceiling increase. Everyone appoint budget conferees for a long-term talk. And then you guys, you want to ease the sequester caps? We'll do that for 1 or 2 years. And let's do it in exchange, dollar for dollar, with some long-term entitlement reform that the president himself was already committed to and is agreed with in his own budget. I mean, what would not be to like about that from the White House? And they still came back and said no. So that suggests that there is politics behind this, driving this, because that seems to be the sort of agreement that would be eminently acceptable by both sides.
Dan, I said earlier that wouldn't it be smarter for Democrats to give Boehner a little something, that he could go back to these folks in the Tea Party and help them understand that what they've done here is not for naught? Rather than trying to get him down and choke him, as some on the president's side seem to do. My thought is that if Boehner is toppled, what comes after Boehner will be much more difficult for the White House to deal with.
I think that's probably correct, and I would assume that the president and the White House team would much rather have Boehner there than not have Boehner there. I think that they are as dug in some ways as some of the House people have been on the particulars of this, i.e. not allowing these decisions to be made against these kinds of deadlines. Now, the Speaker says this has happened many times in the past, but at this point in our politics, they are holding out as long as they can on trying to finesse that question.
Yeah, and look, I think, first of all, politics in the large sense is what this country is all about. I mean, this isn't a minor game. This is the President of the United States who is dramatically trying to change the country in a variety of ways, Obamacare, the stimulus, you name it, making a decision that he wants to be legislator-in-chief and that he's prepared to run a very tough fight. I mean, any normal, traditional president would have taken the deal that Kimberley outlined. This president has no intention of being normal. He wants to dramatically change the country. The House Republicans are the great barrier to doing that. And there's a danger as the House Republicans get better at this that they're going to cause more and more problems for him. This is the moment, I think, in his mind to try to solve it. And I think I would not be at all surprised to see us technically have a huge problem Wednesday and Thursday.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back. A lot more to talk about. We're back now with our panel. Kimberley, you just brought up something we haven't talked about. Just from a standpoint of technical standpoint, they have got to get something done here pretty quick, or the process won't allow them to solve this before we hit that debt ceiling.
Well, this is now the center. This is in the Senate, and as we know, the Senate doesn't move very quickly. It needs 2 or 3 days just to get something passed, and then it needs to go back over to the House where there's no sure agreement that it may not be amended or changed and sent back to the Senate. This is going to be a long process, and if they don't get something done, started soon, then it may not be finished by the Thursday deadline.
Does anybody at this table think that what we're seeing here is helping the perception that people have of America around the world?
Well, no. I mean, clearly it's not. It's not helping the perception people have of America in America, right? I mean, the lack of confidence in the United States among consumers, I think, radiates all around the world. And you had Christine Lagarde saying just this morning that it would be devastating if the United States, you know, the go-to country in the world financially, were to breach the debt. Now, you can argue that some of that spending is flexible, but the problem is perception is as important as reality. And if the markets think that the government can't get its act together, which they already think, it will have a very devastating effect. In 2011, we didn't go over the debt ceiling. We didn't breach it, and it still had tremendous consequences. Consumers paid $1.3 billion more in interest in a short period of time, and it cost the economy some $16 billion in other ways. And that was by not going over. Christine Lagarde again said this morning that she thinks it would cause a global recession.
Well, let me say, first of all, being lectured by a French leader, given Europe's inability to solve any of its major problems, doesn't overwhelm me. But
she's not the only one.
I know, but I'm just saying, I watched her clip this morning and thought, this is what we need, is to be lectured by somebody who represents a Eurozone that has totally failed to solve its problems outside of Germany. But in addition, I think it's very important to understand two things about this. One, if they really had to, you can, by unanimous consent, move in 2 hours between the House and the Senate. Now, that requires a level of agreement that's pretty amazing.
Well, a level of panic, probably, too.
But the truth is, the American system, when it absolutely has to, can move much faster than people think. The other thing I'll say, since I represented the House and have the usual House attitude towards the Senate, anybody in the Senate who believes they can get a deal done without Boehner's approval and send it to the House and have it pass the House is totally out of touch with reality. I mean, if Reid thinks he can maneuver the House Republicans into accepting his version, they will defeat it just because of the traditional institutional hostility.
But Boehner's still going to have to make the choice, I assume, of whether he has a totally united conference or if the hardliners are split off in a final vote.
Look, it's pretty clear that if John gets a reasonable deal, he'll take some heat on the right, and the right has given him, I think they now believe in him enough that they would tolerate that. That's not the question is he in the room helping make the deal? Because if it's clear he's isolated, he will have no ability to pass anything in the House.
What is the impact on the Republican Party from all of this? I mean, this poll done by the Wall Street Journal, the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, I mean, it was stunning. I mean, it set people back on their heels. And I've talked to Republicans and Democrats who both said the same thing to me. In fact, as I said earlier in the broadcast, one of the reasons that the Democrats suddenly got an idea of taking a harder line is they realized the Republicans were being blamed for all of this.
Well, as the Speaker said, it is a long way off the election next year. So I don't necessarily think that this immediately translates into some answer about what happens in next midterm election. I think the Republican calculation as they go forward is, having taken this step and got where they are and sort of said that they do insist that something come out of this in terms of a debt limit, that what they're hoping is that they can in fact get a deal that they can come back and say, look, we did make some progress on entitlements, we did make some progress on spending, which is something that, by the way, the vast majority of the public actually backs them on. The debt ceiling fight, in contrast to the Obamacare health care fight, is one in which, every poll shows that Americans think that there ought to be some sort of negotiation and deal if you're going to raise the president's spending authority.
One former Republican senator, I won't give his name, said to me yesterday, if there's one good thing that will come out of this, it is that Ted Cruz will never get another thing done. Do you think so?
Well, I think everyone's going to have to step back and ask what the tactics were here. Look, every Republican is united, every conservative is united that they dislike this health care law and that they want to see. This was a tactical fight from the start over those who thought it was better to let the health care law go into effect, use it the way that Republicans did in 2010 to win a greater election in next year's midterm, take back over the Senate, and have a sort of united House and Senate to push back against the president, versus those who felt you had to take a stand now. And I don't necessarily think that has proven to be such a swift strategy.
What do you think the impact of Ted Cruz has been?
I think Cruz, much like Rand Paul and much like Mike Lee, represents a new generation of outsiders who speak for millions of Americans who deeply dislike this city, deeply dislike the bureaucracy, and for a variety of different reasons want very dramatic change. I actually think the parallels to them are people like La Follette and Bora and the people who are all, by the way, bitterly disliked by the establishment. I mean, if you come in, if you represent the second largest state in the country, you beat a multi-millionaire incumbent lieutenant governor, and you arrive with all the certainty of being a Texan, and then you behave like a Texan, and you aggressively go straight at the entire establishment, they're going to dislike you, and you're going to wear the label proudly, and Cruz will be a bigger figure 2 years from now than he is today.
But the thing that's so surprising, though, is not that Cruz acted that way when he got here, right? He cut a wide swath, and he meant to. Is that people followed him into a box canyon, to quote the Wall Street Journal, when there was no way out. They didn't have any leverage to do what they sought to do, and they had no exit strategy for when that failed, how they were going to get anything other than, you know, terrible poll numbers, declining poll numbers, business community against them, people saying they're no longer going to fund Tea Party candidates, you know, not Democrats saying that, Republicans saying that, and an increased bitterness and infighting in the Republican Party. His greatest accomplishment is uniting Democrats so far.
I think that the problem for the Republican Party now is which part of the party is going to actually be more dominant. I think the Speaker's right that Ted Cruz and others have a following around the country. But this is not anywhere close to a following that could command a majority, certainly in a presidential election. And at some point, whoever the people are who are thinking of running for president in 2016 are going to have to figure out how you create a coalition that includes the people like Ted Cruz and the people around the country who agree with him, but with a different focus, a different edge, a different look, a different message. I mean, not an abandonment of it, but it has to be put in a different way. And if it looks like the Cruz part of the party is in fact the dominant party, then the Republicans will have longer term
30 seconds.
No, two quick things. One, we're in so much trouble as a party that I think Christie will win by more than 20 points. Just a reminder about how complicated this is. Two, what you're looking for ultimately is Reagan, not Goldwater. And my guess is it's going to be a governor, and that we're going to nominate a governor who will, in fact, bring together a unifying message, largely of economic growth, getting rid of all the bad parts of Obamacare, and beginning to get us back to a balanced budget.
And showing they can get stuff done, too.
We will end it there. Thank you all very much. Back in a minute.